Today's show is brought to you by Cotswolds Outdoor, Cross Bikes, Garmin, and Cumulus. Hello and welcome to We Need More Heroes. In the age of Donald Trump as president and Kim Kardashian a role model for millions, it's easy to lose hope. But there are still brilliant people out there who can inspire us to live better. Join me, George Beasley, on a mission around the globe to find them. We Need More Heroes aims to inspire and guide ordinary people to live extraordinary lives. Visit weneedmoreheroes.co for show notes and more info. If you enjoy the episode, please leave us a review and rating on iTunes and subscribe if you'd like to hear more. Thanks for listening. So hello and welcome to another episode of We Need More Heroes. We're currently on a friend's farm in El Pescadero in Baja, Mexico, having just completed our ride of the Baja Divide, which is an amazing off-road biking route through the wild and raw beauty of the Baja Desert. Some of you guys have been following online, so we finally made it down, which feels amazing. And if you're into bikepacking or fancy giving something new a go, I highly recommend this one. Although, a little caveat, it's certainly not for the faint-hearted. Just Google Baja Divide if you'd like to learn more about it. There's also loads of snaps of our trip on Instagram, so just take a look there at We Need More Heroes. But now, on to today's guest. So very excited about this one. He is a resilience expert, author, adventure speaker, and expedition leader, to name but a few of the things that he's into. Resilience is certainly a buzzword now, and we talk a lot about it on this show. And this guy has it in bucket loads, having spent 30 years cultivating his own personal resilience, undertaking high-altitude climbs, mountain rescues, and experiencing intense survival situations on a scale that most of us will never come close to. But that is exactly what this show is about, learning from those who veered out on the margins of human experience and potential. To date, he has climbed and led expeditions in Alaska, Argentina, Bolivia, Ecuador, Mexico, and Nepal. He summited the 6th highest mountain in the world and spent more than a year of his life sleeping in a soggy tent. So some pretty great credentials. His book, The Ledge, an inspiring story of friendship and survival, a national bestseller in the US, and the winner of the National Outdoor Book Award, details his epic survival story, having to save himself after falling 80 feet deep into a crevasse on Mount Rainier. This story was even made into an episode of the TV show I Shouldn't Be Alive. Years later, he was seen stranded at Camp 1 on Mount Everest during the 2015 earthquake in Nepal. His story was covered by the likes of the BBC, CNN, NBC, and loads more. He now operates the company Speaking of Adventure, which he distills these hard-earned lessons, applying them to business and life more generally. So, without further ado, Jim Davidson, welcome to the show.
Thanks, it's great to be with you.
Thanks so much for coming on. So let's just start with how we connected. We featured lots of adventurers on We Need More Heroes so far, and fascinated by resilience, and that's a real recurring theme. And Cody, one of the We Need More Heroes associates, he was reading your book and just said it was a fantastic tale of resilience and epic endurance, and a real exciting one. So by the wonders of the internet, a few weeks later, here we are. So yeah, thanks again for coming on.
Oh, absolutely. Tell Cody I said thanks for reading, and I'm glad to be with you today.
So I've given a little background on yourself, but is there anything else that you'd like to put out there, or can you give us a little bit more context into your backstory?
Well, I think probably something that might be tied into the backstory of climbing is that part of the way I got comfortable being up high on mountains and cliffs was working with my dad's painting company at a very young age. And we did all kinds of crazy industrial jobs, like painting church steeples and even climbing high voltage electrical towers when there was 230 volts running through the wires. And we would be climbing around on the steel like monkeys, perhaps 80 feet to up to 250 feet off the ground. And that foundation kind of gave me the feeling for working in a small group, mutually dependent upon each other, and trying to get a job done, in that case, painting the electrical towers. And I think that's what kind of pointed me in the direction of becoming a climber. So that's kind of the deep background on how I became a climber.
Uh-huh. And so do you have a fear of heights at all now, or are you pretty just comfortable with it? You sort of over fear of heights?
Well, it's interesting. Fear of falling is one of the few fears that we're actually born with, which I think as we get older, we understand if you fall, that's because you're up high. So fear of heights kind of comes from fear of falling. So I don't think it goes away completely. Sometimes when I'm standing on a vertical cliff of, hundreds of feet or thousands of feet, I'll look down and I'll go, "Whoa, that's kind of scary," or it'll get my attention. So it makes me a bit nervous depending upon the exposure. But I find it just as much exhilarating as I find it a little bit nerve wracking.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly exciting when you're up there, even though it's scary. That's sort of why it's a great thing to do and why it interests humans. And I'm sure if there was no fear factor there, then there would probably be no point in doing it. That's good to get a little bit more background, but I do like to hear the answers for the rapid response questions when I kick things off. So let's just go back and kick through those a little bit quickly. So, Batman or Spider-Man?
Spider Man.
Is this due to the climbing thing?
The climbing thing, but I think also the freedom. I read Spider-Man comics when I was a young boy, and the fact that he could just swing through the air and kind of fly and leap from building to building, I really liked that. And also, he had a little bit of a sassy wit when he dealt with the bad guys. So I liked his kind of humor and his sass as well.
And what did you want to be growing up, Jim?
Very much wanted to be an astronaut. I applied even when I think I was about 11 years old. I sent a letter to NASA to find out what it took to be an astronaut and if I could be an astronaut. And to their credit, they actually wrote me back. And somewhere in my
Wow.
basement, I probably still have the letter. I remember reading it a few times now that I've been older. So yeah, very much dreamed of becoming an astronaut.
Wow, that's amazing. NASA, you got a letter from NASA at 11.
Yeah, I wrote them and they took it serious, wrote back, and I can sort of see it in my mind's eye. And I said, "What does it take to be an astronaut?" And they said, "Well, you have to have at least a bachelor's of science, hopefully in physics. It would be better if you had a PhD." And I was like 11 years old. And I said to my dad, "What's a bachelor of science?" And he said, "Oh, well, when you finish high school, you go to college for 4 more years." And I heard that and I said, "Well, I'm not doing that. I don't want to go to school any longer than I have to." So that was sort of the first ending of the astronaut career. I still kind of kept it alive as I studied science in high school and later college, but I wasn't quite astronaut material when it came to physics. So I soon realized that eventually the astronaut dream drifted away. But yeah, I thought it was very nice of NASA to actually write back to an 11-year-old.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow, that's probably the best thing in the world when you're 11 years old, getting a letter back from NASA. But trying to be an astronaut is just insane. Like, talk about an elite occupation. You have to be incredible at physics, pretty fit, super smart, really resilient. God, you really need to be almost like another species to be going up there. That's their job. They're at work going into space. It's amazing.
Yeah, they truly are probably the best of the best, and they have to be excellent in all those areas you mentioned, and sometimes more. Sometimes they're an engineer and a pilot and a doctor all at once, and I'm like, how do you even become one of those, let alone all three? So, yeah, I wasn't good enough at physics, so I eventually went into other sciences. But certainly, that was a dream when I was a young boy.
Yeah, I think it's such a good dream to have. So difficult to do, but Matt, well, we might get a chance to go to outer space with Elon Musk sometime soon anyway, if he hurries on up with his SpaceX. So it's just around the corner. And if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Boy, I'm thinking the ability to help somebody else get what they want, just to maybe kind of read their thoughts, and if they thought, "Oh, boy, I really could use a glass of water," give them a glass of water. If they needed a lift downtown, just to be able to sense others' needs and fulfill them right off the bat, that would be a really cool superpower to have.
So we talked a little bit about your maybe what gave you the tendency to climb first, getting used to those heights. But what was it like when you actually first started to climb? When did you first climb? You mentioned that you did that painting of high altitude stuff, but when did you first actually go rock climbing and become introduced to it?
It was about the summer of 1981, I guess it was. And I'd done a backpacking trip through Maine in the Northeast United States. And I kind of got into the wilderness and I enjoyed backpacking. And the trip leader did some rock climbing. He had taken a class through National Outdoor Leadership School, so I knew a little bit about rock climbing. And he took me rock climbing once, and all of a sudden I was scaling this steep vertical cliff, not particularly high, maybe 80 feet or so, but just to get off the ground and look down and go through the physical struggle and have the doubts and then still make the top was a real thrill. And so that got me interested in technical climbing. And I realized it was some of the skills that I've been using and learning working with my dad's painting company. And so I think I kind of brought it all together in the summer of 1982 and took a 3-day rock climbing class in New Hampshire. And that's what really started introducing me in a proper manner to becoming a technical climber.
Mm. And were you hooked on it after that, or was it a slow burn, or did you just all you wanted to do is climb after that? Because we've met so many climbers out in California when we were traveling through there,
Hmm.
dirtbags as they like to be known, and they'll sort of just give up anything else in life to just go and climb, and they love it, and they live in a van, and they really go like head over heels. It seems to be one of those things that you can just fall in love with, and it just becomes so electrifying and exciting and all consuming. What was it like for you into progressing through rock climbing?
Yeah, doing those first climbs kind of opened the door. I think I'd been preparing myself for years for the interest in it. Like I said, I've been climbing buildings with my dad. I was also reading mountaineering stories and wilderness stories, and I was very intrigued by it. So when I started to actually climb, that sort of opened the door for me to be a participant rather than just reading about it and dreaming about it. I got very into it for sure. It kind of consumed all my spare money and all my spare time. In that, I used to be into other things, martial arts and whitewater canoeing, and I just absolutely dropped those and put all my money and time and energies into climbing. I never quite went as deep as those the honored dirt bags that you talk about. I didn't drop out of college and and eat out of garbage cans. I was never quite that committed, perhaps, but I certainly spent all my spare time and holidays. And whenever I would change jobs or end semesters, I would always try and adjust the schedule. So if I had to work for you and you'd say, well, Jim, when do you get out of school? I would go, well, I get out June 1st, but I can't be there to see you until June 15th. And you'd go, well, okay. And I would go, success, I got a 2-week vacation. So I would always try and adjust the schedule at every opportunity to get some time to climb and go away. So very dedicated with all my spare time, but never quite moved into the van.
Amazing, love it. And do you have a favorite climb that you look back to and just think that was amazing, or maybe even just a favorite place to climb?
There's so many over the years, but you have fond memories of your roots. So certainly climbing Mount Washington in the state of New Hampshire was one of the first serious climbs I'd done. I did it in the winter the first time, and being above tree line and feeling that incredibly powerful wind hitting me, and there was nobody up there except our small party, and I saw the frozen tundra. I got these views of snow-capped peaks as they stretched along the White Mountains. That was a very impactful thing that really made me realize I want to do whatever it takes to get into this high alpine environment. I want to learn how to become a rock climber and an ice climber and learn how to winter camp. It just kind of cemented in that, yes, this is the place I want to be in the high alpine. So even though I've climbed many mountains since then, those first winter climbs of Mount Washington anchored my roots pretty deeply.
Yeah. And then it's been a long journey from there to your more recent climbs and doing more technical climbs. But Mount Rainier, the climb back in 1992, was probably your most eventful climb, or I guess the most intense climb that you've ever probably undertaken. Can you just give us a brief recap of that story and just tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Sure. By 1992, I'd been climbing about 10 years with rock and ice and snow and had done some higher peaks here in Colorado. And I was connected with a good friend of mine named Mike Price. And we had met while we were going to school together here in Fort Collins, Colorado. And we climbed rock and ice and skied together. And since we'd both been climbing for a while, we decided we wanted to do a harder, bigger peak. So we picked Mount Rainier in the state of Washington. It's about 14,410 feet. And we had climbed peaks that high in Colorado, but Rainier is covered with all these big glaciers. So we knew that for us to do that route, we would have our hands full. We'd have to climb ice and rock and snow and bring it all together in a multi-day climb. So in the spring of 1992, Mike and I committed to climbing Mount Rainier together. And he was a very experienced climber. He had about 4 more years of experience than me, and he was really an instructor for Colorado Outward Bound. So he was out in the wilderness all the time. So in June of 1992, Mike and I went to Mount Rainier and climbed a difficult route on the north side called the Liberty Ridge.
Hmm. Yeah, so you headed up there, and then after that, became an unexpected turn of events, I guess is a way to put it.
Yes, yes, very much so. We summited on June 21st. It took us about 3.5 days to get up there because we'd done a fairly steep ice route on the north side of the mountain, like I said, the Liberty Ridge. And we summited in good weather in the morning and started going down by a much easier route called the Emmons Glacier route. So it's lower angled, it's about 30 degrees, but it's heavily crevassed. So Mike and I stayed roped together about 50 feet apart as we had been for the last 3.5 days. And we figured about 5 hours down the glacier and a few more hours through the woods, and we'd be back at the car that night. Hopefully, get a hamburger and a shower and a beer before the day was done. And we made good progress descending. And then there were a few other climbers on the mountain because we were on a more popular route. But we were by ourselves, and we were just about maybe 45 minutes to an hour from the edge of the ice, just below 12,000 feet. And there were crevasses around, and we knew it. We'd been crossing them for days, and we would probe with our ice axe in front of us to feel for those crevasses and look for them, of course, visually. And we were crossing a section that seemed was made of solid snow and ice, but it wasn't. Underneath the snow was lurking a giant hidden crevasse. And even though I probed with my ice axe, when I stepped forward, the snow collapsed beneath my foot. I sank into a crevasse up to my knee, and I screamed to Mike, "Falling!" to warn him that I was starting to have a snow bridge collapse beneath me. And the snow bridge collapsed completely, and I went into the crevasse, tied to my partner Mike, back on the surface. And we started a big crevasse fall.
80 feet deep, is that right?
Yes, sadly, that's exactly right. Mike slowed me down for the first 50 feet. He did his job, but the snow was so soft he couldn't stop me completely. And as a result, as I went in deeper and deeper, and it got darker and my speed picked up, Mike got dragged across the surface of the snow and eventually pulled into the same crevasse with me. And then we just tied together, plummeted down into the darkness. And I fell another 30 feet. Snow fell on me. Mike landed with a free fall after the whole 80-foot depth. Snow fell on him, and when everything stopped moving, there was just a little bit of rope sticking out of the snow pile, and maybe my hand and maybe a foot, and both of us were buried under the snow. And I had landed okay because Mike had done his job and slowed me down, but Mike was critically injured in the fall, and I dug out of the snow a little bit. Took me a while, and I was still buried in the snow up to my chest, but I found Mike had been injured, and he hadn't been breathing for the last 10, 12 minutes. I don't know. And there in the darkness, I started doing CPR on my friend.
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah, I can barely even begin to imagine what that experience must have been like. But I guess you sort of knew that if Mike wasn't going to make it or be able to get out of there, then you just sort of had to start climbing and get yourself out. What was proper mountain climbing etiquette for him? If somebody's falling in front of you, are you supposed to cut them off, or are you supposed to just sort of dig your ice axes in and hope for the best, or what are you supposed to do?
Well, good question. The absolutely always in climbing, you do the best you can to take care of your partner no matter what, even if it puts you at some risk, and that's precisely what Mike did. Often when you cross glaciers, you tie in with ropes of 3 or 4 people, so that you don't get in this situation that Mike and I were in. But we had climbed a very steep technical route on the north side of the mountain, so it's really a two-person climb. So it was just the two of us on the rope. No, we always stayed in a position to take care of your partner and never cut the rope. There's only really one instance of that ever happening, which was a famous book and movie called Touching the Void, where
Yeah,
one partner fell in the crevasse. That's probably what would put that thought in your mind. And in
exactly.
that
Yeah.
case, the partner, Simon did cut the rope on Joe Simpson, which seemed sacrilegious at the time. Everybody, including me, read that headline and thought, what? There's no reason for that. There's never a proper protocol for cutting the rope on your partner. But as it turned out, through luck and a lot of skill and even more luck, it turned out that really saved Joe's life, and both of them narrowly escaped. So that's a very rare instance where that was the appropriate thing. And Mike wouldn't have had time anyways. He was digging in with all his strength and skill to stop my fall. So proper etiquette was to protect your partner, which Mike did. Sadly, even though I did CPR for some extended time, I couldn't bring Mike back, and he did pass away down the crevasse, and I was still buried in snow up to my chest, and dug myself out and started CPR a second time when I could give better compressions, but couldn't bring back Mike. And I was devastated. I was terrified. I was horrified. I was racked with guilt. But I realized I couldn't just quit down there. I had to do something about it. So there was a protracted mental struggle for me and a spiritual struggle to try and rally the attitude that I was going to try and climb out. I thought, well, Mike's gone and I'm going to be dead soon. Mike's the better climber. if he passed away, I'll certainly be dead. But I realized I couldn't just quit. I had to do the best I could to try and get me and Mike out of the crevasse, and that started the long mental and physical process to figure out a way to climb, and then actually start the climb up the overhanging walls.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's well, it is a long time ago now, but you've written a bit about it and often talk about this major event that happened in your life. But do you remember at all what was going through? Was there anything going through your mind when you began to climb, or was it a sheer state of survival at this point where you just more of in a state of flow and you're just putting the ice axes in and concentrating on what was a very difficult climb, if you doing by yourself?
Yeah, I kind of vacillated between the two kind of conditions you just described. It took me over an hour to figure out a way to climb alone up the wall because I had insufficient number of ice screws to anchor myself. Sadly, Mike was gone, so there was no one to hold my rope. So I had to figure out how to self belay using sliding one way friction knots, and I'd never done that before. So all of this took me about an hour just to figure out, and then the actual climbing took several more hours. So I would sometimes be very driven and in a flow state and doing exactly what I needed to do. And other times I would get stuck and I wouldn't know how to tie the knot. I would struggle to figure out the right way to rig it. I would be sort of flustered, and then the emotion would come washing over me. I would look at Mike and I would look at this scary crevasse. And so I kind of vacillated between those conditions of being in a flow state of doing, a state of analysis, and just overcome with the emotion of what was going on. And so I constantly had to regain control of myself and return back to the task at hand, which was try to get up this crevasse wall so everyone back home will know what happened to us.
Yeah.
And so it was a long, protracted struggle.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's amazing when people go to these really extreme boundaries of human experience. The will to survive is just astounding. When you could so easily have given up, and a lot of people do when they get into that situation. It makes me think of, who is it? I think it's that Nietzsche quote, and it says, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how," or something like that. In other words,
Mm.
if you have a real meaning for your life, then you can withstand any hardship. And just wonder, was that so, what sort of motivated you to do that? Did you have an overarching um, motivation or feeling about what your life meant that kept you going, or was it more an instinctual thing to survive?
It kind of came to me in layers. At first, it was, I want to survive. I've survived this horrible fall, and I was in relatively uninjured state. I had some injuries, but nothing critical. And I wanted to get out. I wanted to live, and I wanted to see my wife again. That's what it first started getting me up the wall. But as time went on, and I encountered more and more challenges, and I became more exhausted and more stressed, that it took me over 5.5 hours to get out of that crevasse. And so that will to live kind of faded, and it became more a responsibility to honor what Mike had done in catching my fall. He gave his life to catch me. And so as I got a third of the way up the wall, I began to get overwhelmed with the physical challenge and the difficulties. And I thought, who am I kidding? I'm not going to be able to climb this. I'm just putting on a show here. This is ridiculous. I'll never get out. I should just quit and go down back to the ledge and crawl in my sleeping bag and go to sleep and let the cold take me overnight. But I
Mm,
realized I couldn't do that because Mike had given his all for me. I can't quit just because it's hard or scary. And so then it became about honoring what Mike had done for me. And then I started thinking about all the things my dad had taught me on all those construction projects, climbing those electrical towers. How you don't quit when other people are counting on you, especially when their safety or the quality of their life are depending upon what you do. And I realized I couldn't bring Mike back. I knew that, but his parents deserved to know what happened to him. And I had to get out of this crevasse so that I could tell them what happened to Mike. And if
mm,
I got to live long term, well, that was a benefit, but that was really too much to even dream of right then because I had some physical injuries. I thought I probably wouldn't live long term. I just needed to get out so they could follow the rope back down to Mike and know what happened. So it kind of became less about me and more about my obligations to everybody that had helped me in life so that they would know what happened to us. And as a result, you're right. Once you know your how, you can bear so much because I realized it didn't matter how scary it was. It didn't matter how much pain or risk there was. I had to get out of the crevasse so my family and Mike's family would know what happened to us. And so as a result, it was very simple. I actually got calmer as it went. I realized I'm just going to keep climbing until I get out or until I'm dead. There's really no pain to be concerned about or fear to be faced. It's just a matter of just simply doing everything that's required of me. So it actually got calmer and simpler as the hours passed on.
mm. Wow. But it still requires a immense amount of resilience, and that's something that you talk a lot about. Had you trained your resilience in a particular manner before, or was it just that you'd done some climbs and it just so happens through the process of doing that that you become more resilient, or was it something that you really specifically thought about?
We had done some, Mike and I together, and also with other climbing partners through the decade before that. We had actively sought to put ourselves in situations that were a little bit beyond our comfort zone. For instance, maybe we'd only done a hike that had taken 12 hours round trip before, and we would pick out an objective that was going to take 14 hours or 16 hours. And we'd go, wow, we really need to think about this. How much water and how much clothing and how much food, and can I go for 16 hours? I've never done that before. So we actively would pick goals that were a little bit further beyond what I called building a broader base of experience or a broader pyramid of experience. And then we would also add on one variable at a time. We would go from a 12-hour hike to a 16-hour hike. Then we would try and do a 16-hour hike in the winter, and then a 16-hour hike in the winter, and finish in the dark. And we would start adding one variable on top of the other. And then sometimes we'd even go out of our way to make it difficult. We would bring intentionally less food or less water than we thought we needed, just to see what it was like to go without food and water for 16 hours. So we would kind of add one variable at a time, so that someday when we get in a really big situation, when it's high on a mountain and we're out of food and water, and my headlamp dies, we'll know what it's like to be in those situations. So we had done some training to sort of take on more over the years. And I think that builds mental resilience, and it builds a confidence in yourself and your partners that even though it may seem beyond our capacity, if we stick together and just take this one step at a time, we can solve some pretty big problems. And then someday when you find yourself in a terrible situation, you can use that as a resource. You can go, okay, this is further than I ever gone before, but I've done other stuff that's hard, and maybe I can solve this problem too. So yeah, I think without actually using the word resilience through the years, by putting ourselves in harder and harder positions, we were training ourselves to be more physically and mentally resilient for something bigger somewhere down the line.
Yeah, that seems like a great way to do it, to sort of just like training like you do with anything when you're learning maths, then you first start with addition and subtraction, then you go on to algebra, and then you go on to a little bit more
Hmm.
complex stuff, and it sort of like builds the building blocks. But it's pretty uncomfortable to do that kind of stuff, and a lot of people don't want to go through the hardship, but it's so important because in every life you'll always come up against some kind of hardship, whether it's probably not physically that difficult unless you're doing that kind of thing, but becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable and pushing yourself a little bit. It
Yes.
sounds almost like a Spartan approach to training, and but it really molds your spirit and lets you know that yeah, I've been here before in this sort of uncharted territory of fear and pain, and allows you to sort of push through it when you're a bit more familiar with it.
Absolutely. All the growth will occur outside your comfort zone. For instance, if you're comfortable running 2 miles, you could probably run 2 miles on a regular basis the rest of your life, and you would never have to leave your comfort zone. You wouldn't experience pain or doubt, and you would be very good at running 2 miles. But you'll never run more than 2 miles. You'll never run a 10-mile race or a marathon. And so, if you want to run at a higher level or go greater distances, you're going to have to run more than 2 miles. And you do it smart. You read how others did it, and you train well, and you get hydrated well, and you wear good shoes. And all of a sudden, one day you run 2.5 miles, and it hurts a little. And then you build up over time. And if you do it long enough, you can slowly build up to running 10 miles, 20 miles, 50 miles. And a few people have shown us that you can run 100 miles if you train long enough. And so the growth requires you to go outside your comfort zone, whether it's climbing, running, mathematics, or whatever. But that's where the growth is going to happen, when you go beyond what you're comfortable with and push your own boundaries out further.
Mm. Yeah, so I think that answers the next question that I was planning to ask, which is just for people who aren't in the climbing arena or sort of zone, but are looking to train their resilience. How can they do it? But I guess that's it. Staged progressions and pushing yourself a little bit outside of your comfort zone and learning a little bit more about yourself and how you react in those situations, regardless of what it is. And then I like the point that you drew out about learn from other people as well. You don't have to just go it alone, and you can really see what works and what's sort of possible and what you can expect to be able to accomplish at certain stages of training in whatever field you're progressing in.
Absolutely. We have so much information available to all of us now with the internet, that you don't have to go it alone if you want to become a better musician, run further distance, become a better mountain climber. You do the research, you follow the path laid by others. You have to be willing to do the hard work and put in some time. It can take years to decades, depending on what your goal is. But that willingness to push yourself and learn, you can just improve your capacity in any area, like education, right? I mean, you year after year, you get smarter and smarter, and you learn other things, and then suddenly, 15, 20 years down the road, maybe you're smart enough to become an astronaut or a college professor, whatever it might be, one step at a time. But you have to have that drive to realize you're going somewhere big. So I think it's key to have that distant vision to give some sense of direction that, wow, maybe if I study enough scientists, maybe I can become an astronaut. Or if I keep running, maybe someday I can run a marathon. And that distant vision and the willingness to do the daily training and keep pushing yourself, that's what can take you very, very far.
Yeah, definitely. A vision is so powerful. How much of resilience do you think is innate?
I think it's the old nature versus nurture question. I don't know about percentage, but I'll say about maybe a third to half of it, I think, is innate, which is you're kind of born with a personality. We see that. And some of it gets nurtured well or not nurtured well, depending upon the household that you wind up in and the family situation you're in. And so, there is some natural starting point, but absolutely anyone can improve their resilience by doing the things we've been talking about. Pick that hard goal and start to work on it. You don't have to carve your own path. You can follow paths carved by others. Because we've all heard many stories of people that had a difficult childhood, or maybe something traumatic happened to them in college, or something difficult happened in their family later on, and they've found a way to recover from that. It's not easy. It can take time, but when they in that process of being willing to push themselves and grow, they become something more. And that's the thing. By taking on a challenge, you refine yourself into a better version of you. And you can do that maybe at age 10 or 40 or 70. So some of it is innate, but I don't believe that most of it is. I think most of it is a willingness to put yourself out there, and maybe a little bit of luck, bumping into mentors that can give you a sense of vision and give you a sense of guidance. And so I think in those early years, we're kind of all looking for somebody who can show us how to get to that next level. And then when you get to the later part of life, you have to ask yourself, how can I mentor somebody else? How can I help someone else reach their next highest potential? So it kind of shifts with time, but it can definitely be nurtured and expanded.
Yeah, which is so encouraging. Like most things, we can become better with purposeful practice. But I find it so interesting to see the same event can happen to different people, and some people can use it as sort of fuel to the fire to grow and to ensure that they'll never act in the way that was so horribly acted upon to them. Like, for example, if you see somebody who has an abusive father, then sometimes it can make the child an amazing dad, and they think, well, I never want to do that, so I want to be this great dad. Or sometimes, or most of the time, most people who are violent or who abuse other people have themselves been abused. So I find it fascinating to explore that area of why some people manage to turn it around and use it as a positive, and some people it overwhelms them and affects them, and they end up becoming the sort of monster that inflicted so much harm upon them.
Yeah, I think there is kind of a very critical inflection point there. Like you say, when something traumatic happens to them, there's almost a little bit of a subtle choice there. Will you just, repeat that and inflict a similar trauma on others, which is hopefully not the path they choose, or somehow you're going to rise above it? And I don't have a magic answer for that. I think some of it is innate. Some of it is you've had role models. Perhaps you've seen other people lose a loved one and recover from it. You've known somebody else who's been through a similar tragedy and bounced back and still made something good of themselves in life and helped others. So it helps to have role models, which is one of the great purposes of what you're doing here with the podcast, is sharing good stories around so others can perhaps keep that in their back pocket in case they ever need it someday. And that can be a real benefit. And that's what happened to me down the crevasse. When I realized that Mike was gone and I had to climb this overhanging ice wall, I thought, well, that's it. I'm a good climber, but I'm not good enough to climb this wall. That's it. I'm dead. There's no way to climb out. But I remembered reading the book we talked about earlier, Touching the Void by Joe Simpson, an amazing story of a man who climbed out of a crevasse. And I thought about what he did. And I thought, well, if in this little moment of trying to pump myself up, I thought, well, if Joe Simpson climbed out of a crevasse, I can climb out of a crevasse. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, Jim, you're no Joe Simpson. He was a better climber than you. And I thought, yeah, but somebody else has done it. And he was injured with a broken leg, and I wasn't. His crevasse was a little bit easier. Mine's a little bit more overhanging. Let's call it even. If somebody else can do it, by golly, I can do it too. And I was completely lying to myself. I didn't really believe myself, but I decided to adopt that attitude that said, yeah, this can be done. I'm just going to do whatever it takes. So it was a little bit of pretending. There's an old saying about salespeople to fake it until you make it. And that's kind of what I was doing down there. I was like, sure, I can climb this wall. Inside, I didn't believe myself at all. But I knew that if I thought I can't climb the wall, then that would become true too. So I put on a fake air of confidence to get myself into action and try and get out of this situation. And that gave me a chance to start doing what I needed to do. And that really gave me a chance to start. So you kind of need to have that moment of truth, if you will, to decide I'm going to try. And exactly how to do that, I'm not exactly sure. It's kind of a magical moment.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, though. There's probably part that's innate, but also the belief is so powerful. The story that you tell yourself, like your story was able to be changed by knowing about other people who've done similarly difficult things, and reminds me of Roger Bannister and the 4 Minute Mile, where nobody thought it was
Yes.
possible, and then as soon as one person does it, then people realize, oh, it's possible, and then you have lots of people doing it over the next year, even though nobody had done it before. And just having, so the belief is probably, well, certainly one of the most important factors in allowing us to push ourselves beyond what we think are our limits.
Yes, having that belief in the moment, and then afterwards, when you do get through the terribly difficult situation, I think there's another choice. Like maybe not in the athletic endeavors that we were just talking about, climbing a wall or running the 4 minute mile, but if something difficult has happened to you in your childhood or later in life, and you look at it and say, "Wow, that was really bad," and I'm trying to decide what I'm going to do about it. We've been hearing for years from psychologists about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and it's a very real thing. It happens to survivors of all types of trauma and first responders and soldiers. But they've been studying sort of the good side of psychology, what makes people happy, what makes people strong. And in the last few years, they've come up with a phrase of PTG, post-traumatic growth, literally growth after trauma.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it's sort of the only way that we can grow.
Yes, you look back at it and say, gosh, that was terrible. And what am I going to do different? What am I going to learn from this experience and maybe even pass on to others? And you're right, that's how humans have always grown. Something bad happened and others tried to learn from it. Somebody got ill or sick from eating the wrong plant maybe 10,000 years ago. And other people said, all right, let's make sure we tell everybody not to eat this plant. There was a traumatic incident, but others learned from it. And we can learn from our own traumatic incidents as well. And there's a lot of power in that. It doesn't make the trauma go away, and it's not easy. But if you think about it long enough, what I say is you have to deal with the mess and the meaning of it. And after a while, you can pull some strength from that bad or sad thing that happened and say, I'm not going to let that happen to my kids, or I'm going to make sure I tell other people how they too can get through this traumatic situation. And those are the kind of people that we look up to give each other strength and help us through our own challenges. And I think that's higher calling that you can potentially step up to after you get through a tough situation.
Absolutely, yeah. And so after you climbed out of the crevasse, and then you managed to come back down safely and sort of integrate back into normal life. You mentioned in one of your videos that I saw online that you struggled, as I think we can all empathize with, the sort of why me situation and maybe a bit of survivor's guilt. And can you just talk about what that was like and how you managed to overcome that?
Yeah, survivor's guilt is a real thing, and I sensed it right away when I got out of the crevasse. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it meant. And I kind of rode the wave of it up and down over time. And it's a situation where, Mike was my friend and he's gone. And I was racked with guilt that, being with him on the glacier. And I was the one that stepped on that patch of snow that looked innocent. I probed it with my ice axe, but it wasn't innocent. It was a trap. If I hadn't stepped right in that spot, if I'd stepped to the right or left, it might have been a different outcome. So there was absolutely a sense of guilt. And then the self-doubt as well, which is down the crevasse when I was giving him CPRs or some other medical thing I should have been doing in a different sequence. And I discussed that with doctors. So the guilt is real and it's a struggle. That's part of what leads into the post-traumatic stress. But, you have to ask yourself, I can't change history, and Mike and I were partners and it could have been the other way around. And it took months and even years. And I thought, well, if it had been reversed, if Mike had survived and I had died, what would I want Mike to do? Would I want him to feel guilty the rest of his life and curl up in a ball and hide in the darkness in his bedroom? No, I'd hope he'd remember me, but I would want him to live his life, to go still have fun, enjoy all the things that we can, to do good work in his life. And so that kind of gave me some slow permission, if you will, to start thinking about that, saying, well, what am I going to do with my life to honor what Mike stood for and the fact that I'm still here? And that wasn't easy. That took years to figure out, and it kind of came on slow. But eventually, that's what led me to start sharing the story of what happened to Mike and I on Mount Rainier in our book that I wrote later with Kevin Vaughn called The Ledge, and the videos, was to tell people what happened in the hopes that they can garner something from it, whether it's hope or inspiration, and to share some of the lessons, because I realized it's sort of an obligation I have to pass on what I learned, because I was lucky enough to survive. So it helps me in my business of trying to share lessons to help other people be more resilient, but also it helps me make decisions in my life that no, I'm not going to just work all the time. I'm going to take some time off and climb mountains and go on vacations, because life is meant to be enjoyed. And I think if Mike was still here, he'd be saying, "Yeah, if you can go to Nepal, Jim, just go, man." He would want me to be enjoying and doing things. So I do these things both because I enjoy them, and it honors the memory of Mike a little bit as well.
Yeah. But after so much adversity in that climb, how was it going back to climbing after that? Did you ever think about just pursuing something else?
Oh yeah, yeah. In those first few months, for sure, I was, really terrified of the mountains. The mountains had been this great place of physical exercise and enjoyment and recreation and spirituality for me and Mike and most of the climbers I hung out with. And now they represented the opposite. The mountains had almost killed me. It had taken the life of my best buddy. I was scared of them. Didn't know if I could go back. I didn't know if I should go back. I mean, maybe I was lucky enough to escape, and I should never go back there again. And I played with that idea for a while, but I thought, no, it's really, it gives me a sense of belonging to be up there. I don't think anybody would have blamed me if I said, no, I'm done with climbing. That I'm lucky to have survived. I regret losing my friend Mike, and I'm simply not going to do that anymore. That would have been a fairly reasonable and logical conclusion, I think. But I realized that the mountains called to me. Just like for some people, it's math or marathons or music. It's the mountains in my case. Now, I didn't just run back to it and pretend it never happened, because I thought that would dishonor the lessons and that I'd learned, and dishonor the memory of Mike, to just pretend it didn't happen and just climb on blithely and pretend nothing had occurred, because something had occurred. So I took it slow. I just started doing easy hikes and then harder hikes, and then easy rock climb and then harder rock climbs. Going back onto the ice, that was scary. Going back
Mm.
onto a glacier, that was very scary. And I'm still a little uncomfortable with it now, but I realized that if I wanted to climb high peaks, and I wanted to truly face what, these mountains meant, including even crevasses on glaciers, I was going to have to go back out there again. So I did it slow over years, and kind of built my confidence up and climb with good partners. And we try to climb very safe and pick our routes carefully. But eventually I did go back onto those glaciated peaks and did ever higher and higher mountains. But it's not easy, but I think it sort of also helped me sort of come to grips with a little bit with what had happened and what it all meant. So it was sort of a personal challenge for me to go back and push my boundaries a little bit to see if I could get comfortable in that mountain environment again. And the answer turned out over time to be yes.
So that's the end of part one. I hope you enjoyed it. Part two is also available for download, so if you'd like to listen to that, go on ahead and get listening. Thanks very much.